All right, this essay is built around the word journey. Journey, a defined course of travel, one's path in life. From the Old French journée, meaning a day's length, day's work, or travel. From the Latin diurnus, of one day, or dies, day. From the Proto-Indo European root dieu, meaning to shine, which root has the following derivatives: sky, heaven, and God, as in adieu, meaning goodbye, but also quite literally at the end of our respective journeys to God. Every journey, as the saying goes, begins with a single step, which is a very cliche way to begin both a journey and this essay. Yet, so it is. Except for faith's occasional breviloquent leap, there is no other way. One foot down, step, followed soon after by the other, step, and then that first foot again, step, and then in turn the second again, step, and so on, but faster, step, 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 from point A to point B, or sometimes in true wandering fashion, to no point in particular, just in some general direction, north or south, or maybe, more bravely, north-ish or south-ish. Because one purblind stride before the other is nothing if not brave. And the gap is wide between actually being lost and just losing track of time, or losing oneself in a moment and not really knowing where you are exactly or where you are headed, but knowing in the end you will get there. You will get through to the other side, or in full circle, you will find your way back to the beginning. And only then will you be able to look behind and connect like dots across the page your wild, meandering footprints, and see in them not only plan and purpose, but absolute beauty in spite of, no, because of the push and climb preceding the place where you have stopped, for a moment anyway, to rest your weary souls. Step. Which brings to mind this stanza from T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And that is all there is to say at the outset, except to repeat in less poetic terms that every journey that begins must indeed also end, which is not to say we will not then immediately embark on another journey, that the end of the first is not the beginning of a second, and so on. But for all intents and purposes, every step is a means unto an end, a means unto the end. At some point in life, whether we are ready or not, we extend one leg after the other and take our final step. July 20th, 1969, 10:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Neil Armstrong stepped from the foot of the Lunar Excursion Module ladder onto the powdery surface of the moon, hours earlier than initially planned. It was the end of one journey, one small step, 8 years after Kennedy's initial challenge, 9 months after Armstrong was first considered a potential candidate for Apollo 11, and about 8 months after his name was officially announced. It was also the beginning of another. That giant leap for mankind. A journey that continues today in some form or another, but on that day anyway was as simple as one foot followed by the other. All while the world watched his moonwalk bleed into the early morning hours of the 21st, in awe of the reality of pedestrian footsteps across both that terrestrial body and the future pages of our history. Step. Coincidentally, on that same day, 35 years later, in the last evening hours on the 20th of July, also earlier than expected, I too was preparing to receive from outer space, as it were, my first temporal explorer, a process that also bled and bled and bled some more into the early morning hours of the 21st. 9 months prior, he too had entered the discussion for the mission ahead. And 1 month after that, or 8 months before his arrival, we also officially announced his coming, which coming seemed to take forever, but eventually was thrust upon us, ready or not. Just as America watched Armstrong exit the limb decades before, I then watched my son, still tethered to a lifeline, come down his mother's chute. 226,000 miles from the moon, into a small room where the doctor on call soon after took him from my arms, but just long enough to press his little feet onto a black ink pad, and then one after the other onto a previously untouched sheet of blue paper, all before tacking it to the outside wall like a flag. Our baby's first small step, if you will, around which we all leaped for joy. Step. Footprints are records, perhaps the oldest form of written record, having been splayed across the land long before our fingers, tools in hand, could ever scratch on paper accounts of our ingenuity or conquests, or, more crudely and earlier still, paint across the wall the first interpretations of the world around us, a group of rhinoceros, a pig, a bull, the holy tigers in the Helan Mountains of China. But oldest of all, in Mesoamerica's Cueva de los Manos, outlined in red, those stenciled handprints against the rock. And below them, in the dust, or perhaps in memory only, the footsteps of the people who first put them there, followed by the wanderers who later discovered them, and then the people who have since come to stand before them in reverence and wonder, and for a moment anyway, hover their own hands in front for comparison's sake, connecting the past and the present, which display footprints below, handprints above, is a really cool juxtaposition of ancient record, both intentional and unintentional. Step. Which brings to mind, oldest of all, the dunes of present-day New Mexico, across the White Sands National Park with its waves of white gypsum crystals blanketing the Tularosa Basin, where there exist thousands of fossilized comings and goings, the ancient footprints of mammoths, giant ground sloths, and, most surprising to scientists, early humans. A group of hunters, it is assumed, tracking the large paw prints preceding theirs by maybe just a few minutes. And then the small footprints of a toddler zigzagging beside his mother's footprints, then trailing behind hers, then disappearing altogether as she lifted her exhausted child up to her bosom, we believe, and carried him the rest of the way, leaving behind in the soft mud not only a deeper impression, but an abiding testament to love. Step. Which brings to mind my boys. Now, over the 21 years that followed the arrival of the first one, 1, 2, 3, 4 strong, each following one after the other, all of them wanderers and explorers, but also, in the footsteps of their dad and grandpa, mighty hunters, like those early ancestors tracking the animals of their time. And did you know that the origin of the word explore actually has more to do with hunting than some wild traipse into the mysterious? So it is said. Step. To venture into an unknown territory, literally or figuratively, in order to learn something about that territory, or to inquire into or discuss options or solutions to a problem. These are just a couple of the modern denotations of the word. But etymologically speaking, Latin's ex, meaning out or to exit, followed by a plurare for to cry, weep, or lament, the word explore simply described the call of the wild a hunter would bellow in the hopes of finding success and, in turn, sustenance, among other things. In a sense, then, exploring today is no different, at least in the form of gathering or hunting for information. It is the act by which we reach out, vocally or otherwise, to get from sources whose journey lies behind them the expertise or sustenance we need for our journey ahead. In this manner, my 4 little explorers began their missions to Earth, thrust forward by the cries of their mother, first the come cry, and then, months later, her weeping as they broke the exosphere and exited the womb, crash landing into the water. And then, after taking in the atmosphere for the first time, their own cries, calling out in their strange native tongue for the necessary nourishment only their Mother Earth, as it were, could provide. And how the crescendos and the decrescendos of their every beck and call imprinted then and remain imprinted now across the landscape of my mind and heart. Step. The other day, from the upstairs balcony by my room, I looked down onto the hardwood floors below and saw for the first time in the lines and spaces created by those tongue and groove connections what looked like a musical staff on a single sheet of music, with its 5 lines and 4 spaces, and scattered across them the faint and sometimes not so faint footprints of my boys, like little notes across a single measure, sometimes on the lines, but other times in between them, which is where, in between, my boys were created in the first place. From that tongue and groove connection on the sheets in the crescendos when their mother and I made music of a different kind. And so there I stood, for a long while, taking it all in over and over again, the lines from top to bottom, like a countdown sending a rocket into space. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then, again, but from bottom to top and in letter form, E, G, B, D, F. Every good boy deserves fudge. And then, according to the same pattern, the spaces too. 4, 3, 2, 1, followed by F, A, C, E, face. And in each footnote, I could see the little and not so little faces of my boys. Those 4 little quarter notes I had somehow created, like 4 beautiful beats across the various measures of my life, collectively making me whole. Step. Since then, I have counted and reflected on the varied stories behind each of those footprints, those comings and goings, one after the other, some clear as day, others faint, and others still imperceptible to the naked eye, perhaps in memory only. Across the years, they've grown in length and width and purpose, from a sterile size 4 all-purpose shoe to a sweaty size 13 football cleat, from "Dad, come play with us" to "Dad, can I take the truck?" to "No, Dad," at all. Just the sudden rumble of the engine as fishing or hunting or school or sports or work or girlfriends took them away from me. All those moments of connection or disconnection, but always tethered to my home by a reliable lifeline of footprints. Step. Like the footprints of salesmen and HVAC guys and plumbers and electricians, some with booties on their feet to protect the floor from the outside snow or mud, but others not at all. And church members checking in and visiting family and friends, of course, to celebrate birthdays or eat dinner or to study or even just hang out. Yes, the footprints of lots of family and friends, but especially those from the few friends who were with us enough to make them like family, like Nate Witterberg, that quiet, gentle, adventurous, red-haired, wild wanderer who last celebrated the new year with us in 2022, the year of the tiger, and to whom I once gave a birthday card with a textured drawing of a tiger on it, because he was similarly majestic and rare and holy like those Chinese wall drawings, and stealthy and intriguing and mysterious and, as the card said, badass. Step. And then there are the footprints from the last few years of life, which weave their story to a much bleaker tune. Like mine as I walked to the door at my wife's urging, and hers as they trailed slightly behind, stopping short in witness of the divorce papers I then was served. And the steps of my boys as they exploded from their rooms, then gathered around me and held me up, and as I, through our sobs, somehow held them up too. And then, a few days later, her final steps as she exited the house for the last time, never to really be seen again, leaving in place of XOXO a lot of X's and, oh God, where is thy hiding place? an ex-wife and an ex-mother-in-law and an ex-father-in-law and all my panicked pacing and ex-brothers-in-law and ex-sisters-in-law, and ex does not always mark the spot, I have learned. Which truth led me to write this personal poem entitled Treasure Hunter. Even if an ex does not mark the spot, there is a beating treasure behind your chest from which I want a doubloon. Step. And my hurried footprints again, but this time alongside my parents, as we rushed to take one of my sons to the hospital after the weight of those heavy days became too much for him to bear, and who, thankfully, lives, but wears on his wrists prints of a different kind, which, it is not lost on me, are not far from the palm where another great wanderer bears his scars, those indelible symbols of one mission accomplished, and 3 days later, with victory over death secured, a second mission undertaken. But then, a few months removed from our dark day, the unexpected absence of footprints, Nate's, after he heart-achingly decided in a dark moment of his own to cut his beautiful journey short, and to whom we never adequately got to say goodbye. So Nate, adieu. To that God to whom I cling blindly, because I don't know what else to do except believe that life and hope will triumph in the end, but that this is not the end for Nate, that he is not lost, just wandering among higher peaks. Step. Ever in my mind, however, will be the response in that moment. The footprints of my boys again as the 3 younger ones joined me in the middle of the living room and reached out for Nate's fellow wanderer and best friend, my oldest son, their brother. And if the floor had been of soft mud, explorers in the future would most certainly note the sudden, deeper impression in the toe prints from the moment they placed their hands against the white wall of their brother's ribs, leaving a red outline of handprints like a bruise, and literally held him up, which was to say then, and is to say now, we've got you, brother, we've got you. And they did. And do. Step. And last of all, our footprints since, which have over the years, like passing seasons in moments of fermata and attacca, given rise to better days, and which have in turn been added upon by others once again, the salesmen and the maintenance crews and the churchgoers, of course, but above all by family and friends, and yes, even new love interests and the potential for words like stepmom and stepdad and stepkids, which is a really big step, but on my mind because of the footprints left by one gal in particular, Renee Joanne, who is this beautiful, long-haired, nerdy bird watcher, not to mention an incredibly rare bird in and of herself, and whose first name means born again, which is not wrong, because she flew into my life when I least expected it, and helped heal my heart with her own, giving me reasons, so many reasons, to believe in love again, and who, from the moment I first met her, made an impression on my heart too, like the little talon prints of a western tanager hopping into spring across a late melting snow, which is why we keep taking blind steps into the unknown. Step. I am not a musician by any stretch of the imagination, but I wonder how those footprints would play, how all of our footprints would play at the end of our respective journeys if some heavenly composer, a boundless beatific Beethoven, if you will, were to overlay them with a staff, then accordingly assign a time signature to each, and invite the heavenly orchestra and choir to play and sing it as the soundtrack of our lives. Would they so easily fall into place, miracle of miracles, and turn out harmonious and sweet? Is that possible? Or, as we often feel about life, would the piece be entirely dissonant and shrill? And if the latter, is there beauty to be found in cacophony? Is true joy and beauty the absence of discord, or instead more fully heard and appreciated because of it? Step. Does the hope and optimism and triumph at the end of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony ring more powerfully in our hearts because of the darker and more brooding tone presented in the beginning? Are his last four notes more light-hearted and beautiful because of the boldness of the first four heavier ones? And did you know that this most famous symphony of his doesn't even begin with a note at all, but a rest? Like a big breath and a lifting of the souls before a long and winding journey, with its crescendos and its decrescendos, its steps and its accidentals, all before culminating in victory, but beginning first with da-da-da-dum. And did you also know that those first four notes in Morse code, short, 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 long, make up the letter V, as in V for victory, which is what it came to represent historically during various wars, in fact, because maybe our victories in the face of struggle have always been guaranteed from the beginning, just not the path to them. So where will my footprints fall? On the staff. And when I make that final leap into space in search of new worlds in life, how will my song sing? Step. Which brings me back to where I started, and the fact that Frank Sinatra's 1964 recording of Fly Me to the Moon was one of a number of songs on a NASA-issued cassette player that accompanied Neil Armstrong and his crew to the surface of the moon, where they literally played among the stars, and then back. Legend has it even that Aldrin, the second man to place his footprints beside Armstrong's, pressed the play button on that very song just as he undertook his first walkabout. 8 years later, aboard the two spacecraft the U.S. launched deep into space in search of extraterrestrial life, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, NASA would again turn to music. This time as a goodwill ambassador of sorts, should alien life ever happen upon them. That the diversity of life on Earth might be adequately represented and better understood. A time capsule on gold-plated phonographs, records. A snapshot of all that makes us diverse and beautiful. 115 images depicting life across its many facets, birth to death, animal to man. Cordial greetings in over 50 languages, including Morse code. Words or phrases like hello and peace and come visit our world. A catalog of nature's own greetings in the form of wind and ocean waves and birds singing, just to name a few. A sampling of common sounds, laughter, heartbeats, and footsteps across the floor. Then important music through the decades, too. And among those songs and symphonies included, as one of primary representatives of who we are, where we've been, and where we are going, the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth. Step. About a year ago, on a hike in midwinter, after observing in front of me the footprints of my own golden records, who were just ahead of me on the path, and then the songs of birds and various declarations of love carved into the 3 rickety bridges along the way, I took a leap of faith and wrote the following to a fellow traveler from a different path, my bird watcher. I want to wander with you. I want to get lost. I want to be found. I want to hear you breathing next to me as we struggle up a steep incline. Then I want to hear that heavy breathing subside and calm as we sit on a bench at the peak of that same incline to rest our feet and take in the view quietly, because we don't always need words to say what we are thinking and feeling. Then I want to pick up the trail again. I want to carve our initials inside a heart on the weathered wood of this bridge here, because your name is already carved deep into my soul, so that no matter how the bridge or I weather and age, future wanderers will see our mark and wonder and dream and fall in love with the idea of love, which is the only fall that really matters in the end. And then I want to go home and create poetry with you, because we cannot create children anymore, and because creating poetry is the next closest thing to breathing life into a tiny body and then letting it go, allowing it out into the universe to explore, to get lost, to reach for people, and to eventually find them, and then find its own way, and in doing so make deep and lasting connections that, in the end, make the world a better place. just like you've made my world a better place from the beginning of our relationship. Step. We came back from that hike, my boys and I. I kicked off my shoes at the door. They did not. And the floor was, in that moment, after spending a significant amount of time sweeping it the day before, covered anew with their footprints, following the same path at first up to the porch, across the threshold, and into the living room, but then diverging, each going their separate ways, like 4 roads in a yellow spring wood, leaving me behind, alone, as if at a fork, wondering which path of the 4 I should take. I went upstairs, where I could see them more clearly, and I did, as if for the first time. Not just the fresh, heavier ones, but the old, lighter ones too, and some in memory only. All of these footprints, lots and lots of footprints, infuriating, inspiring, muddy, miraculous footprints of various shapes and sizes and directions, their comings and goings, but especially, as of late, their goings, like connected dots across the ever-turning page. These little written records reminding me that life is good, so very, very good, and every moment on this journey worth weeping over. Step.